Welcome back to the Mindset Mutiny. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Dennis Clare, sports medicine podiatrist, endurance athlete, coach, husband, and dedicated father. He spent decades treating high-performance athletes, served as medical director for the Exeter Criterium, and now practices at Spear Hospital in the White Mountains. Dennis doesn't just treat athletes, he is one, a master blaster in mountain running and Nordic ski racing. He's competed in road, cyclocross, and mountain bike racing, all while coaching and raising his two sons. Let's dive into his mindset, training, and what it takes to keep evolving. Dennis, what's up, dude?
Hey, how's it going, Mike? Thanks for having me on.
Man, it was kind of one of those things where it had to happen, after, getting Ben on here. And it's just like, the way Ben talks about you, dude, we're in for a fun night. So I'm pretty excited to have you here, man. So thanks for taking the time out of your night, and away from the family and kids to talk a little bit about, growth. And you got quite a resume, man, quite a resume. And, and I only covered probably a quarter of it, if that.
Yeah, many years. It's kind of odd to think of it's been that long. And like we had talked about before, at different times in your life, you end up doing different things, and one thing leads you into another. But having that endurance background, it's always there. You always have a little bit of an engine if you work on it for long enough.
Oh man, dude, and for anybody that's listening that doesn't quite understand endurance sports, I mean, this isn't a 5-mile run. We're talking, when I think of endurance, I'm thinking 30, 50 miles, something like that. And then as far as bike racing, so, Dennis, walk us through what the mileage looks like when we talk about endurance.
Oh, I mean, that's a good question, because I think there probably is an obsession with longer distances with running and things like that. But, when it comes to the basis of it, you think of like a track meet with relatively short events. I mean, I started in the 800 meter in high school, and quickly realized I was not very fast. So, I mean, it could be anything, right? And right now, the way my kids are, how old they are, it limits me what I can do. So right now, I'd say like most stuff that I want to get involved in is going to be 1 to 3 hours.
Cool.
Maybe as they get older and I have more time, I get into things that are longer. But most of the Nordic ski races I do are 10 to 50 kilometers in that range. And the cycling stuff like gravel, mountain biking could be fairly short as well. But anything that probably lasts 1 to 4 hours is what I'm doing most of the time.
As of right now, because I know you've been on some journeys, so what is like one of the ones you're most proud of, one of your endurance, opportunities or whatever it was that you did that you got back and you were like, dude, that hits the chart,
I think the one thing I love about the New England endurance community is that there are some really interesting events. So like one of the biggest ones, it just changed iterations this year too, is the Tuckerman Inferno. Have you heard of this?
Have not. You got to explain it.
So the original one was, well, going back like 100 years, I think the original one was basically summit to floor of Mount Washington Valley skiing. And it turned into, I want to say in the 90s, a pentathlon, they called it. So it was 5 events. And a few years ago, I think it was COVID driven, or around that time of COVID, they wanted to condense it and keep it all on snow. So it turned into an all snow event right around Pinkham Notch, including a fat bike, cross country ski,
cool,
to a snowshoe run, to skinning up into the bowl of Tuckerman Ravine and doing a technical line. They switch it depending on the years, right gully, left gully, lobster claw, and ski down through the bowl, down the Sherburne Trail, and the finish is at Pinkham Notch there. And so that's probably one of my proudest achievements, is doing that solo, and doing better than I expected in the field that was there. So yeah, and it's just, there's a ton of stuff like that. There used to be a thing called the Wildman Biathlon in Gorham. And then just this summer, I did one. I'm surprised I did it for the first time. It was called the Top Notch Triathlon. So you start in Franconia and bike uphill to Echo Lake at the base of Cannon Mountain,
Yep.
swim across the lake to the other side, and then run up the ski slopes of Cannon Mountain. It used to end at the top, but this year it went kind of halfway up and back down to the bottom. Um,
Dude.
but all that stuff is like, do you specifically train for that? Not really, but it's
Nope.
just something that, if you've got the years of, and you don't necessarily need them, but if you've got the years of something built behind you, that's the fun stuff to do.
Dude,
There's
that's
a ton of
impressive.
that stuff. Yeah.
That's impressive. So, I beautiful area, right? Where you're doing all that stuff, White Mountains in my mind, I do miss the old man in the mountain. Just want to put that out there. I do miss that. That was something nice to see as a kid. Had a lot of history there. I've been up Cannon Mountain, across the way, Lincoln, Lafayette, Haystack, beautiful, beautiful ridge walk. So know the area well. Could never imagine swimming through Echo Lake, which sounds like a bucket list item for some people, because I can tell you when I've seen Echo Lake, I didn't even know you could swim in it. So maybe there's this little they make an exception for when they're doing this event, right? So my biggest thing when you talk about that one you were super proud of, um, what's going through your head that keeps you going, because we all know, well, maybe not all of us know, but when you're doing something like that, there's a lot of peaks and valleys, in the mind. And there's a lot of, quit that wants to enter the head. And of course you've been pretty seasoned, so you've been able to ward these things off quite quickly versus, when you first started, it might have taken a hold of you a little bit faster. But, can you describe for me the self-talk that you're kind of chatting with yourself about, because we all have it, and I know I have a certain one, and mine, it tends to be a little more aggressive than maybe it should be. But I'd like to just hear your perspective on it, because you definitely have been to the edge. You've continued to push past that discomfort and into that area of unknown. It's impressive. So, hats off to you, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give you two answers with that. I'd say like 99% of the time it's very monotonous. I'm just trying to gauge my effort, realize where, beyond being honest with myself, where I'm at. Like, am I pushing too hard? Am I trying to stay with these guys that I should have no business staying with? Or am I okay? Am I comfortable here? And you got to gauge that line the whole time, because so if you're dipping way too far over your aerobic and sometimes your anaerobic threshold, you're just going to be paying for it later and you're not going to be able to get through the thing. So a lot of it is just sort of gauging the activity. And with some of these mountain events, you got to realize you're going uphill. Even if you're going half the speed that you were just 10 minutes ago on the flat, you may still be over the limit. So a lot of that is just constant self-regulation, constant reminding yourself, are you drinking enough? Are you eating enough? And the science over the last 5 years has been, you can pump yourself full of a lot of carbohydrate that will keep you at a fairly high level, being able to stay in that threshold zone for a very, very long period of time. So a lot of that is just sort of like, it's almost robotic at this point, how you're thinking, keeping yourself within those zones and reminding yourself to eat and drink. And if you've trained enough, it's fairly easy to do that. I've done things where, wasn't prepared for, and then more,
Sure.
it's kind of like, just get yourself to the next tree or the next spot or whatever, if you're just trying to get through something. Um, Actually, Ben and I just did this past spring, 100-kilometer mountain bike race that I was very underprepared for. And we'd signed up for it. We made it into like a 2-family vacation. So I remember telling myself, I'm just going to go until I see the wife and the kids, and I'm going to get inside that van, and that's going to be the end of the day. And so, when I rolled up to that van, and there's 4 little kids, yelling or cheering, like, I can't quit now. I got to keep
That's
going.
right.
So,
That's right.
yeah. So then that side of motivation, where that comes from for me, is a lot of things. I've got, my youngest son has a rare genetic disorder, and he's been through a ton of surgery, a ton of pain. I've witnessed him go through some very terrible, painful tests as like a toddler where he was just screaming the entire time. And my wife has some medical issues, and I think of them through some of that when it gets difficult. I lost my dad over 20 years ago, and a lot of what I think has driven me this way through these years and being busy with a lot of other things, but always prioritizing exercise is, carpe diem. He didn't get to live his whole life. I'm getting close to his age when he passed now. And, you got to seize the day. You can't, you got to take advantage of what you got. And I think about that the last 2 decades in my 30s, and I'm in my mid 40s now, thinking like, well, another 10 years, I might not be able to do specifically this. So I've kind of gauged what I'm doing based on, inevitable decline of my physical capabilities. So, what does that mean? Do I go on this trip, this trip that's a little more adventurous? I probably should do that sooner than later, So a lot of that comes from, losing someone that was very special to me at a, very young age. So, but most of the time it's very robotic.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's powerful. And thank you, for sharing that. We all have some hidden motivators in our life, and I do like the mindset that you have towards that. You're not running from it. You're using it for good, which is very impressive. And I talk to a lot of people that have been through different things in their life, and all different stories, right? And including my own. And exercise, one form or another, has always been where I've kind of anchored, over the last 5 years to provide, a relief from different things that I'm processing. But a few things come to mind. First of all, the example that you're setting, for your kids to follow, especially when, you're coming across that finish line completely gassed out. That's the shit they're going to remember. And, they're going to draw on that later on when they have to dig deep, and they're going to remember the example that you set. And I always try to tell people that, somebody's watching. You need to always, give everything that you have. And that can kind of sound generic at times, but you know what it means to give everything that you have, and I always tell people, like, if you're not pushing to tears, you have more to give, and if you're not pushing through the tears to the point where they stop, I don't think you've realized your potential in many different things. And that can be, and Ben and I were talking about this when he's doing his master's, because I shared with him when I was in the middle of my master's, I said, um, Ben, there were days where I would sit at the fucking table crying, just sitting there in tears. I'm doing schoolwork every single weekend for 2 years. And, it just comes up and gets you, man. And at that point in time in my life, I wasn't really pushing as hard then as I am now, but it's all kind of relative, because you adjust to that level of push that you're doing, and that level of activity, and then you just keep pushing more. And in a way, endurance sports is almost a very reflective of life itself, right? Where you started running 5 miles, now you're running 10, now you're running 20, now you're running 30, now you're picking up a different event, and you're doing this and this, and you're getting used to that weight of draw on the body and the mind and the spirit. And it's similar to life, where you've come through a lot of these hard things, where you lost your dad earlier than you should have. A lot of people could have used that as an excuse. You used it as something different, to turn yourself into something better than you were before, and to push you and motivate you, and to make you provide a better the best example that you could for your kids. And then supporting your kid and having to watch them go through pain, and that's all things that you would never want anybody to have to deal with. But I think it's defined who you are, and it's very powerful. And then to support your wife through all that while she still is dealing with what she's dealing with, that's all really amazing stuff, Dennis. And I thank you for sharing that. And it gives me a really good, angle into who you really are. And obviously when I got on this podcast with you, I have an idea of who you are, because I've heard so many amazing things from Ben. And anybody that Ben thinks highly of, I know is an extremely high quality human being. But for you to let me in on that, I really appreciate that. And when you just mentioned, I can just picture it. I can picture all the kids lined up. You're smoked. You have nothing left to give. You just don't even want to talk to anybody. And a lot of people don't realize, like, after you've pushed that hard for so long, your personality can change to the point where you're not the nicest guy that you used to be, and you don't have the patience that you once had when you started. And to roll up on them, and I'm sure you mustered a smile, and the example that you set. I wish all parents could set that example for their kids, because there's times where I remember watching my dad push, in many different ways. He owned his own business, and I'd always watch him go to work, sick, throwing up, doing all these things. And he's like, well, you know what, Mike, this is how it has to be. I don't get paid sick days, and this is the same guy that when we were hiking Mount Washington, and it's ironic that we come full circle here because we'll get to what you were doing, this weekend. My grandmother and myself, my grandmother, my mom, my dad, my brother, and my grandfather all hiked Mount Washington together. My grandmother, I think, was in her 60s at the time.
Nice.
She's not here. Yeah, she's not here anymore, but she grew up down south. She grew up on a cotton field. I've watched her chop garter snakes into little tiny pieces because the snakes she's used to are much more dangerous. So this woman was very tough. I mean, she was stacking wood into her 60s, quite an example for somebody to follow. But she took a
Yeah.
fall. She took a fall pretty far up the mountain and split her head open. And my dad carried her down on his back and then walked back up to meet us at the top. And
Wow.
this is when we were young. And I still remember that. And, I haven't really talked about it since it happened, but like you bringing that up and that example that you're setting, for your kids, I just want to let you know how impactful that is, because I can remember all the times my dad did things where he didn't have to do them, or he could have shied away, or he could have done something different, but he took the bull by the horns. He went after it. He set the example for us as kids. And so man, that resonated with me when you said it. I was like, you know what? I got to share this with Dennis, because maybe you do realize, maybe you don't, but these are things that will impact the rest of these kids' lives. And, and I think you're setting a great example. So, very proud of you in that sense, for sure. Very proud of you. So great work.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
It's always, I coach my older son's Nordic ski team too. And it's, have for the last few years. This year, I'm just volunteering with his team here. And you wonder what motivates the kids sometimes, like is what I'm doing just normal to him, like, just another weekend we have to go because dad's got something. Usually I try to turn it into something bigger than just the race. We try to, if we go somewhere, we make it into a little trip. But I often think, is that just normal, or is that something that they're going to look up to? But at least they'll have that experience, like have that as a
yeah,
standard, say, of something that they can do. But yeah.
dude, so it's funny. I was reading a book, it was talking about your gut microbiome, how your gut microbiome obviously dictates who you are, your personality. It's called Mind Gut Connection, was the book I was reading, but it talks about how your life leading up to, like, a certain amount of years, right, is how all the gut microbiome decides who you're going to be, and it decides based on inputs and what's going on in your life. So, and not just what's going into your body, so there's a whole visual connection through the mind to the gut, all that stuff, right? It was a really great book. But what you're doing now, whether the kids think it's normal or not, later on when they become adults and they become more self-aware of who they are, they will start to place these pieces, just like I've started to place these pieces. When I told you earlier that I hiked all the 4,000 footers in New Hampshire individually with my family, right? All
Right.
before my 16th birthday. That's a pretty decent accomplishment, right?
Oh, yeah.
Most
Huge.
people, most people have never, hiked more than a few mountains, right?
Yeah.
And some we did twice because we didn't get a view when we went the first time, so the whole time I hated that shit, dude. Every single time I hated it. And I
Yeah.
always was like, why can't we do normal things that normal kids do? Why can't we go to like, I forget what it's called, Bear Right in Manchester is like this fun, like a fun world. It's like, why can't
Yeah.
we go there and do normal stuff? And my mom and dad would legit be like, Mike, you know what? One day you'll thank us later. And, you know, as somebody that's young, you're like, nah, don't know what you're talking about. I would literally do it for the pint of ice cream at the end because we would go and stop at this one place. It was just inside of Twin Mountain. It was near like this campground, Beach Hill campground, and we would go to this one convenience store, and I'd get a big cherry Garcia after the climbs, and that would make it worth it for me. But I've told this story to Ben about pushing, and it's something that my dad and I shouldn't undersell it. My mother can throw a baseball better than most men. You know, she doesn't fuck around, and she's very much like me in a way, for sure. That the Type A personality and whatnot. But you're familiar with the Pemigewasset Wilderness, right? So there's Bond and Bond Cliff. It's like a 20, I think it's like a 24 or 20, I don't know, 24, 26 mile loop. I can't remember, but we were doing it overnight, and it didn't start great, man. We were walking in, so you park in that parking lot, and then you cross that big kind of like drawbridge that's kind of loose with the cables, you know, and you're like, wow, okay, so we're getting into it. And for anybody listening, right, the Pemigewasset Wilderness, what's cool is when you get to the top of the peak, you can't see a public roadway, you know, so all you see is woods, right? Very, very cool. But we were very young, and you know, there's like an 8 mile walk into just the trail before it starts headed up. So we got all our stuff. We're walking in, and there's a woman, and it's really sad. Woman coming out. Her husband had a heart attack on the trail. So her husband had a heart attack as they were coming out, and he was being airlifted out. So here's me and my brother. We both don't want to go on this to begin with. Everybody's, you know, kind of like a little elevated because there's a lot of disturbance at the beginning of the hike. And, you know, this guy's getting airlifted out. So I can remember all this like it was yesterday. Wow. So, you know, we do the climb, we stay overnight. You know, it's too long for us to do in one loop. And I've always dreamed of going back and doing it in one day, maybe mountain running or something like that. I think I need to revisit that. I think it'd be very special for me, especially when I tell you what I believe drives me and where I learned it. So, you know, it's a beautiful climb. You get up there, it's awesome. And then we're coming out, right, the next day. And, you know, we're out of food, dude. We're out of food. Water's running low. You know, as kids, you're whining. You want to take a break. You want to have a snack. You know, when you get that feeling in your legs where all your glycogen's gone. And, you know, at the time I was a kid, I didn't know what was happening. But I got nothing left in the body. So we're just going on spirit at this point. And, you know, we get to like that 8 mile mark where you come to like the flat ground, and now you're just walking out straight, right?
Yeah.
And we're crying the whole way. Both my brother and I crying, sitting down. And my dad just like, you know what, guys, we're going to make it 5 more minutes. And he just kept saying 5 more minutes for honestly what felt like 8 hours. Okay. You know, I don't know how long it takes like a 12 or 13-year-old to cover 8 miles of ground, but dude, it was terrible. I was crying, and he just kept saying it. And I'll remember it to this day. He'd just be like, Mikey, just 5 more minutes, man. Just standing there, 5 more minutes, 5 more minutes. And then I can remember when the switch flipped, and I was like, fuck this. No problem. That Ben and Jerry's is waiting for me. We're going to get out of here. I love how this feels, you know, and it was a really powerful moment to get back to the car. I remember, you know, hugging my dad, being like, yeah, we made it, you know, and he's like, I knew you could, no problem. Like, I'm proud of you guys. Like, great job. That was a good sized climb for people your age. You should be very proud of yourselves. And, you know, we joke about it every once in a while when we're like shitting on my father, you know, we're like, yeah, dad, like 5 more minutes. But that moment, dude, I think he pushed me and he forged me into something that I have today. Like that switch that I have where I can flip it and I can go dark. I believe it was developed at a young age. So in short, and after this long story that I'm telling you, I believe that what you're doing and what you're involving your kids in will pay them for a lifetime. Yeah, just my opinion.
Yeah. No, that's the whole idea, right? Just to kind of expose them to it, get them involved with it. And yeah. It's neat to hear.
Yeah, man. So obviously, you know, you're not just an endurance guy. You know, you got a full-time job as a podiatrist, which I'd love to hear which one came first, endurance or being a podiatrist, and how that all works out. Because, you know, when you start to do these things, you definitely need a good one around you if you're gonna if you're gonna be an endurance athlete. That's for sure.
Yeah, endurance first by far. Yeah, I got into cycling with a group of older kids from school I knew, and they were already racing criteriums and things, and so I used money I'd made in a summer job to get my first bike, and that's where it kind of started. And I was a soccer player, but I had a couple good friends on the cross country running team, and I would do their Saturday long run with them. And I remember getting in trouble from my soccer coach before, like, you're exerting too much energy on the weekend doing like a 10
Absolutely.
mile long run with these guys. And it was just something I enjoyed because we would just do like kind of, casual pace 10 miles, but it was more exploratory. We'd like cut through farms or, I always loved maps and geography. So it'd be like, oh, that, I didn't know there was a hill back there. Or I didn't know you could connect that farm to that beach, like all this sorts of stuff that just fascinated me and really hooked me in at that point. Um, so it really was cycling. I did a few triathlons, like 18, 19 years old. Went to school, did some mountain bike racing and then road racing in college. And then I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do. I actually started on like an ecology background. So I thought I'd finish my degree and get a job as a field technician somewhere, and I couldn't find a job. So I ended up working at home for a bit and got a job as a biology teacher and started coaching. So I coached track and cross country for 2 years. And at that time, teaching biology, some of my students that were interested in medicine, I was like, hey, that was my original idea, was to go into medicine. And they kind of motivated me, these 16-year-old
Oh,
year old kids. I
cool.
was only 22 at the time myself, so I thought, maybe I'll go back to medical school. I started studying for the MCATs, and at a local 5K that I was running, I saw an advertisement for a podiatrist. I had no idea what a podiatrist was. No clue. But he advertised himself as a sports medicine specialist. And so I was intrigued. So he and I shadowed, I thought I wanted to be like a rural primary care doctor. And I
Yeah,
just didn't like the lack of like intervention involved. It's a
sure.
lot of like a lot of thinking. You've got to be highly intelligent and manage a lot of medications on patients, on complicated patients. But I wanted more hands-on. So when the last one I shadowed was this podiatrist, and you do in-office procedures, in-office minor surgeries, and you do surgery in the operating room. And so that blend was pretty attractive to me. And the fact that you do see a lot of endurance athletes, and a lot of people will come to me now and say, I'm not an endurance athlete, or I'm not really an athlete, but I want to walk 8 hours a week or 10 hours a week or something. I said, well, that's an endurance athlete.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You Everyone has a different level of ability. The farthest I ever made it to on road cycling was a category 3 cyclist. If people know that category of cycling in the United States. And, I knew pretty early on I wasn't going to be, Tadej Pogacar, who is the best right now, who can put out 6 to 7 watts per kilogram for a half an hour. So you realize what your level is. But the thing is, I think too many people compare themselves to different levels, and that's where people get into trouble, get into overuse, that sort of thing. But everyone, whatever they're doing, if it's repetitive, uh, I tell them they're an endurance athlete. It's so sports medicine was kind of like my passion with podiatry, and yeah, that's kind of what drove me into it right away. When I was in school, I got involved with the American Academy of Podiatric Sports Medicine, which I still am today. And it's a blessing to help people through injury, because like yourself and myself, uh, if I'm looking at 2 days in a row of not doing something, I'm getting a little psychotic.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so everyone is like this, that does this. And you get someone who's got an issue, an overuse issue, and they're going on 4 weeks, they're going on 6 weeks, not being able to do this. Or, when I've seen professional athletes, they've taken 3 months off already, and they're getting nervous about brand sponsorship, and they're getting nervous about, can I even do this? So a lot of this is hand holding sometimes.
Yeah.
There's a big psychological component to this with people who are so active that you want to, they don't know how to manage things any other way. But, you know, that brings us to the other aspect of all this endurance, all this, like, kind of what keeps you motivated, what keeps you going, is that other half that is becoming more and more important through science. Science is showing us is the recovery aspect of things. People got to know when to rest, especially if it's early on in an injury. If you shut it down and switch to alternative exercise early on in a cycle of overuse, you can recover from the injury a lot quicker. So, seeing endurance athletes is, I like working with them, but they take time, and you always have to focus on recovery and what else you can do to maintain activity at the same time as you are dealing with this issue that holds you back. So yeah, and I find the older you are, especially you get above me, like say 50 and above, a lot of those older athletes, especially runners, they don't want to do anything else. They've never
Yeah.
done a crunch. They've never done a pull up. They
Yeah.
just want to run, 70 miles a week or whatever insane mileage they've kept over the years. And then you get to just below me, let's say below 40 or below 35. They're much more open to, nowadays, the word is prehab.
Okay.
Have a little niggling knee, doesn't hold me back. But I know it's something. It's going to turn into something. What can we do to keep that from getting worse? And they're way more willing to hit the gym and dial things back, and recover. I don't know. There's a famous runner. I don't know if you've heard of Parker Valby. She's a collegiate runner. She just signed with New Balance. Anyway, she won the NCAA cross country championship last year or the year before. Anyway, something like 50% or more of her weekly mileage, because she was so prone to stress injury, like stress fractures, she did on Arc Trainer, which is like an elliptical machine. Uh,
Yep.
so, this highest level runner in the country, like, can't get better than her, isn't even running half the time, is on this little machine in the gym, because she knows what the limit of what she can push herself, at least at that period of her life. These things change from, decade to decade, or even just a year or two later. But that just shows you how adaptable you can be. So I love that perspective of younger people willing to do this extra work to kind of keep themselves from getting injured.
That's great to hear. So you said a lot of great things that I'm
This
like
is
just
very
clicking around in my
meandering.
brain. Like, I'm like, man, we could talk for like 3 hours about what you just said, So for number one, my favorite endurance runner is Sally McRae. You probably know her as Yellow Runner on Instagram. Massive quads, like just like totally outside of what women in the sport look like, right? And she always talks about how important weight training is to staying healthy as a runner. And it is a little bit different, right? So when I tell people I run, they kind of, I think they kind of get a kick out of it because, I'm 200 pounds, and I've got pretty big legs. Not your typical runner, right? So people have these ideas in their mind of what a runner looks like. So I think that especially the older generation, right, where people that run or refuse to hit the gym, but people a little bit younger now see that like kind of whole person that like, all right, well, listen, I can do some deadlifts, I can do some squats, I can build my legs, hopefully strengthen my knees with some leg curls, whatever. And then go out and run. I'm not saying go out and run 20 miles, but like going out and running, a 5 mile run and a 4 mile run and maybe a long run on the weekend, like that's pretty good to be able to do in balance. So like when you're talking about balance and recovery also is speaking my language, but I don't get too far off of that. Some things that stuck out to me when you were speaking was um, levels, right? Levels to this, right? There's levels to everything in life, whether it's fitness, learning, self growth, diet, all of these things. And I think it's very important that you mention that because for a long time, I'd always compare myself to other people at other levels. And that's really toxic. And it's really not a great way to continue to move forward in a positive manner. So, I've had some people in my life, and I even think that Ben was one of them. That's like, hey, dude, like, listen, you're on chapter 3. Stop looking at chapter 50. You're not there yet. Let's
Yep.
focus on chapter 3. Let's complete chapter 3, and then we'll move to chapter 4. And and that was where that whole like started running slow mattered, right? And I told you about me with the 10-pound hammer. I'm not very graceful when it comes to the process. And Ben would tell me, slow run, Mike, just run slow. And then I'm like, fuck, fine. So I start running slow, and then all the progress starts coming. The mileage starts clicking up, and I start being able to go out and run without any pain and all of these things. And then, you talk about recovery, and like you're literally speaking my journey, because it's like I am the person that will run until I can't get out of bed. I'm the person that will go to the gym until I can't get out of bed, because it's like, listen, it says I got to run today. It says I got to lift this day. It says I got to do. We're doing it. But
Yeah.
then I end up going backwards because then I need to take 3 days off. So some of the best advice I've ever gotten is obviously from Ben, and he says, trust the process, get the rest, and when you're rested, enjoy it. And it's really hard to do, as you know, and as a lot of your patients know. So yeah, recovery, and I'm going through a recovery period now where
Mm.
I just started jujitsu, at the beginning of the month, right? And so I was obviously lifting and running quite consistently and doing quite well. And then I'm like, you know what? Life is getting boring. I need to insert more to try to break myself, obviously. So I'm like, let's do jujitsu. I've been scared of it for years. I'd love to be more confident in handling myself. And again, at the end of the day, I've been running from it. So now we've got to decide we're going to run to it. So getting in there the first couple times, Dennis, felt like I got hit by a fucking school bus. Like I've never felt this like level of exhaustion in my life. So I had to take 2 weeks off from running, and I only those days I only got one day in the gym. So I did jujitsu Monday, Friday, and then I got one day at the gym, and then like the next week I did the same thing. So right now I've got like 3 weeks into doing jujitsu. These last couple weeks, what's actually 4 weeks into doing jujitsu, I've got 2 weeks of like starting to rebuild the running in the gym. So when I say rebuild the running, I've run 4 miles last week and 4 miles this week, which is not a lot in the running world, but compared to 0, I'm pretty excited about it. And then I've got 2 or 3 lifts in each week. So if I hadn't taken the time to rest and hadn't paid attention and tracked the data and really looked at how I would feel, I don't think I would have been able to take that volume. But it's like kind of the journey that I've been on, and kind of the information I've gotten from guys like yourself and Ben, who have been through it and have done it the wrong way many times for many years, and then have figured out the recipe. And I've finally decided to listen. So you bring up recovery resonates with me totally. And then the last part is I believe you are doing a very special, very, very special job, because like you said, you pretty much handle foot and lower limb, right? For the most part, right?
Yep.
For anybody that is active and likes to move, whether it's an endurance athlete or it's a 65, 7-year-old person who decides they want to try to be more active, you can deliver life-changing results for those people. And I think that's very special. And I think it might be overlooked in the grand scheme of medicine and treatment. Like, think about when somebody takes our legs away from us, what that does to you, right? And you're getting people back on their feet. You're getting them back to moving, which we've already talked about. Movement has done great things for your life, and movement has saved my life. So in a way, I believe that you're saving lives by getting people back on their feet and getting them back to moving again. So very, very special thing that you're doing. And I think that you're understanding as an athlete and especially an endurance athlete, is people are very lucky to come and see you because you understand what the other side looks like because you've been there. And anybody that's been there can always teach a little bit better than the guy that hasn't actually been there. So it's kind of like if I were to go to a primary care doctor that weighs 300 pounds and he's going to tell me about fucking diet, I'm probably not going to listen to him. You know what I mean? But if I go to you and you're like, hey, Mike, this is my resume. These are my credentials on my athletic journey. I'm going to listen to you. Every little detail that you tell me. So, you come with a lot of experience, and I think you're really your way about delivering what you're delivering as your message is very special. So, keep up the great work, man. That's
Yeah.
impressive stuff. Yeah.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, what you said kind of reminded me of my academic interest in feet is basically evolutionary biology, and it kind of merges what I started in, which was ecology, from looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, and in terms of human development. We talk about 10,000 steps. 30,000 years ago, people were probably doing like 60,000 steps, let's say.
Oh my
You know,
God.
you think of yourself like camping, or when you were doing the Pemi loop. Uh, what is it? You're waking up, you're trying to secure food, right? You're moving around your environment. Maybe you have to go a far distance one place. Maybe you have to go hunting. People were always moving, and as we've lived modern lives, we sit more, right?
Yep.
From kids to adults, and that leads to a whole host of metabolic disease and disorder and chronic disease, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes being the most. And going back to Tadej Pogacar, his coach, this guy Inigo San Milan, he is not only his coach, he's a physiology researcher, and he has studied how mitochondria's role in chronic disease, cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And the mitochondria is the powerhouse of our cell, right? It takes in energy it takes in the energy we take in and provides energy for the cell. And that gets very dysregulated when you're not using it. So the connection of disuse or dysregulation of mitochondrial function leading to potentially, at least in this line of research, to diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, that sort of thing, is a fascinating avenue of science that hasn't been looked at as much as the DNA basis of all of those things.
Right.
And so where I'm going with this is that I see a lot of diabetics. Half of what I do is wound care. A lot of
Yep.
patients with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, neuropathy get wounds on their legs and feet, and it's a whole host of things that they need to do to get better. But let's say I've got this diabetic patient, they're overweight, they start exercising. The thing I always hate to see is someone like that, they start to exercise, they really start to love it, and they develop an overuse injury, and then they have to sit back out. And it's always a tough thing to see someone lose 50, 100 pounds, and then they've got this horrible insertional Achilles tendonitis, and they've got to back out of it for a while. But in all these cases, whether you're someone like that or you're the highest level athlete, there's always something else you could be doing. The human body is so adaptable. And I think from my perspective too, like each one of these things I've gotten into, whether it was like running or cycling, I felt my body change if I focused on one thing,
Yep.
and I'm sure it's most obvious, like you stop that entirely and you get into the weight room. There's a famous marathon runner, Ryan Hall, who was like string bean, like 6 feet tall and
I
like
know that name. I know that story.
yeah.
Yes.
And when he stopped running, he started weightlifting, and he's like huge. He's jacked. But that's the
Absolutely.
human body is so adaptable. You can turn yourself into something totally different, and it takes a lot of time and it takes persistence. But yeah, I mean, the first time I met you is that 1 mile road race, and I've been
Yeah.
used
The
to doing these,
sprint.
right, these hour-long efforts. And coming into my early 40s, at that time I was thinking, you know, I I think I could probably go as fast as I did in high school, and I'm really curious to see. And I didn't put too much effort into it, but it was a good 6 weeks where I probably did 3 or 4 track workouts and maybe 3 or 4 faster road workouts in preparation for that. But I was only 20 seconds off my fastest high school time, uh,
Wow.
from 17 to 42 or 43, or however old I was then. So, yeah, I mean, it's just persistence over time with any of these things. But um, uh, I love to see people make those changes. And what we were talking about before off air, the whole barefoot thing.
Yeah,
Someone
very
barefoot,
cool.
like, not walking down their driveway, their gravel driveway to hiking, major mountain barefoot. Like, people can do that. Your foot is that adaptable to that's a possibility. Um, and until people try these things, you don't know. You have to study. You have to get going on the journey first.
Absolutely. I like being barefoot. I had mentioned to you earlier that I feel that during the summer times when I am barefoot, I'm much happier. I can feel more energy. And I know people are going to laugh at this, but I feel like my blood's flowing easier, and listen, it's not too far off because the whole point of grounding is to separate those blood cells, kind of clump up, and it helps, we're electrically charged beings, right? As a guy I work with that's very, very intelligent with electrical, and he is a firm believer in the fact that our bodies need to be grounded. And when he started breaking that down for me, after I had kind of heard all the science behind it, heard all the podcasts about it, saw the products, being sold, which some are good, some aren't. But then to hear him talk about it, like, just a guy that will fix all sorts of crazy electrical problems on equipment that I, couldn't even imagine. Right. And he's like, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. The body is an electronical being. It needs to be grounded, blah, 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 blah. And, so in my mind, I'm like, as I'm walking around outside or I got my feet in the sand, I'm like, dude, I'm like doing something good for my body. I'm feeling good. And then I'll try to walk a little bit further, on terrain that I don't normally walk on, to try to toughen up my feet. And it makes me feel like, just a little bit kind of back to nature, back to, that more connected feeling, with the earth. And I feel like I feel like experienced some real benefits there. So yeah,
Yeah.
really, really cool that you've done that, especially with you hiking some mountains barefoot. That's also pretty impressive.
Yeah. We'll talk to that over a while, but yeah, I mean, there's no strong, solid science behind grounding, but I'll tell you this, there's no strong science behind this either, but when you look at old people's feet, I see plenty of young
Yeah.
and
Yeah. You see a lot of feet.
a
Yeah.
lot of old people's feet. Being in shoes on hard, flat surfaces, what essentially your foot is not evolved to function with or on. Uh, the only word to describe it is atrophy. You put your arm in a cast for 6 weeks, and you could tell the muscle is weaker. A lot of older people's feet look like that. They're atrophic, like they have no fat pad on the bottom of their foot. Their extensor tendons on the top of the foot have overtaken the muscles on the bottom of the foot that hardly ever work to
Oh,
counterbalance.
wow.
And so, what you lose is this neural connection, right? And you talk about neural connection to the ground, and grounding. But you have many different sensory nerves in your foot. They sense hot, cold, sharp, dull, things like that. The biggest, well, I shouldn't say the biggest, but one of the big ones is proprioception, where you are in space, basically your balance nerve.
Yes.
So, you're doing things like yoga, you're doing things like taekwondo, you use that quite a bit. Someone in a shoe that has their shoe on all day or just walking on hard floor, they don't really have that as much input going into their brain about their environment, and to me, I think that's what causes a lot of the atrophy over time, is just there's no solid connection of environmental input over time. And if you do that for long enough, you get these very atrophic appearing feet. And just the opposite, I've seen like 85-year-old yoga instructors, and and she's got a foot that looks like a 20-year-old,
Wow.
and so that's where I think a lot of that lies. and you talk about a uh, problem. I won't say this, it can be a separate disease, but it's often associated with diabetes, is neuropathy. And neuropathy is loss of or dysfunction of these sensory nerves. And the first thing they tend to lose, or one of the first things they tend to lose, is their sense of balance, because those little sensory nerves just aren't telling their brain where they are in space. And so a lot of this has to do with just like waking up some of that neural connection that gets a little bit occluded when you're in a shoe, let's say, all the time. Um, and so, yeah. And again, just like your mitochondrial functioning pathways that can be adapted through training, your foot can be adapted through training too.
Wow, that's actually some pretty impressive stuff, and it's pretty powerful, when you really lay it out. Because, I'm big into trying to, I've at least realized that there's a lot of muscles in my feet that need attention, right? So, I'm rolling my feet, I'm wearing toe spreaders, I'm trying to take my shoes off when I can. But when you take your shoe off, you take your shoe off, you look at your foot, you can tell it's been crammed in a shoe. Like if you were to Google a picture of somebody that's never worn shoes before, they have a much wider foot. That pinky toe is way out there. Like, could you just imagine that they must have double the balance that anybody in a modern country would have, right? Because you can just, again, it's at the end of the day, it's footprint, right? How big is your footprint to provide that balance for your body? But something that really kind of struck me when you were talking was the neural input to like what your body's receiving through your feet. The only thing that holds us to the earth, that makes contact with the earth, is our feet, right? We're not walking around on our hands. Um,
Right.
so the input to kind of like what connects us as living organisms. We're one of the only animals that wear shoes. Right. So, that's quite odd to think about. And I'm sure you talk about it a lot in your line of work, but very, very impressive. Like just the perspective that you've given me with those few things that you've said. Just I still haven't really put it together. I'll be thinking about it all night. Like the neural connection. There's something there, dude. There is definitely something there. And again, I need to really focus on my feet. But if you were to give advice to somebody, right, like especially people putting some miles on their feet or whatnot, like, what are the good ways to take care of your feet from your perspective, aside from the rolling or whatever, or if you disagree with that, let me know. But stuff like that people can do at home to, to kind of, bring maybe some pain relief, but also like, strengthening or benefiting themselves.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of that. The toe spreaders that you use, like basically you could keep your toes fairly flexible by using something like that. There's a device, Correct Toes, which is meant to be worn while you're active, while you're moving around, which can actually stimulate and strengthen those little muscles of the foot without necessarily having to do extra things. But there are a ton of exercises. The simplest one I tell people to do is arch doming, which is essentially trying to make your arch higher by sliding your toes back. There's lots of little devices out there. There's a device that I really like. It's called the slack block. Basically,
Slack.
it simulates a slack line, like the climbers use and stuff for
Yeah.
balance.
Yeah.
Uh, and so basically, it's like a board a little longer than the size of your foot with just like a cushion underneath. It's like a balance board or a Bosu board, but it's meant for a foot. So the reason I really like it is because it moves side to side, so it gets that kind of like pronation, supination movements, and the muscles that strengthen around those movements very strong. But also, it's the foundation of so many of our sports. When you're running, you're one leg on the ground at a time. And you can see people. I mean, everyone has different strides and different ways of running and functioning, but a lot of times if you have weak gluteal muscles, you get like a hip drop on that one
Yep.
side. So balancing on the slack block, or even if you just balance one leg on a couch cushion and you focus on keeping like your whole body in line, it works on a lot of these stability muscles, including the ones in your foot. There's so much of that kind of like very sport specific stuff you can do. But for runners, cross country skiers, you're always on one foot. And so I like that device for training the whole lower extremity, but also those muscles in the foot. I love just foot rolling. I don't know if you
Yep.
remember the old surfer Laird Hamilton. Um,
No, tell me about him.
so he's got to be close to 60 now, in mid 50s. But he's one of those like original big wave surfers,
Oh,
and I think
cool.
he invented like the hydrofoil surfboard, the one that like
Yep.
could go above the. So anyway, I always paid attention to him because he married Gabrielle Reese, who was a volleyball player. She was like in the Olympics,
How
and so
cool.
my wife is a volleyball player and who's taller than
Nice.
him, and she's taller than me and everything. So, but anyway, he was always an interesting character. But he called it the Laird Hamilton foot torture, and it was he'd use a golf ball.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And so, something a little more trigger point, a little more firm and small that you can really roll in there, um, to kind of just like work up adhesions, get some of those little joints in the foot moving that don't move all that much. The primary reason for rolling like that is that plantar fascia, that like relatively inelastic band on the bottom of the foot that goes through a lot of load strain every day. If you kind of introduce elasticity to that by constantly working on it, stretching it, rolling it, that sort of thing, you'll be less prone to that plantar fasciitis that so many get.
Hell yeah. No, that's great advice. I'll tell you, foot rolling changed my life. Especially my lower extremity pain and all those different things. It's amazing how impactful a lacrosse ball or a golf ball could be, if you utilize it in the right way. But again, just like anything, Dennis, um, it's like the last thing people want to do at night, right? And for me, it's like just another thing I have to do before I go to bed. It's like brushing my teeth. Like, all right, I'm going to put my toe spreaders on. I'm going to roll my feet, and then I'm going to read my book, and I'm going to go to bed, right? So,
Yeah.
just like anything that you've done in your life to get better in endurance sports, it's all about consistency over time. I think you've even mentioned it earlier today. And that always resonates with me for anything that I've ever accomplished. I'm not the smartest guy. I'm not the most talented. I'm not the best athlete, but you know, I, I can be consistent more than anybody, like that's my thing. And I think that's brought a lot of value to my life. And I think it's probably one of the only reasons I've accomplished anything. And I think maybe you could probably even agree to that, so consistency is special. It
Yeah.
really is. And listen, before, we run out of time here, we got to talk about what you did, you know, this weekend. I mean, uh, so I was obviously I was with my wife this weekend, and like I'd mentioned, I'm staying off of Instagram. I've been off Instagram for a while, and I would say it's been very detoxing, to say the least. There's a lot. I could do a whole episode on it. There's been a lot of benefits for me, including a decrease in overall just kind of brain activity that's not positive, I guess is what I could say, right? I have a lot more time. I told somebody this the other day. I said, hey, when was the last time you just sat by yourself and stared into space and just thought about stuff? And they couldn't answer it for me. And I was like, I answered it for myself. It was like the days before I had a cell phone,
Yeah.
the days before you could get internet on a cell phone. I would be able to sit and think. So anyway, not to get too off track, but so we're sitting at the brewery. My wife shows me this video that Ben had posted, and then I see that like there's some people skiing. I see like maybe a couple of rail ties, and then I'm like, well, who posted that? Because it looked like a repost, and then it was you, and I was like, oh, dude, we'll get him on the podcast in a couple of days. This is going to be great to talk about. So correct me if I'm wrong, but you were skiing Mount Washington, 6,288 feet. Um, what at one point, what held the world record for highest wind speed? What was it? 231 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I would say there's probably been 150, I thought maybe 150 deaths on that mountain, but there's been over what they say there's 25 people every year that are rescued off Mount Washington. So
Oh, wow. Yeah.
you're there
Including the
skiing.
night we were there. I
Really?
just I just found out. Yeah. And Ben and I may have actually seen them on their way out. Can't be 100% sure of that, but it kind of met the description of what I read in the report. But yeah, I know and Ben and I were talking like, today would be kind of a harder day to get into trouble for, all these different reasons, but you can't, we had skis on, but you stick your leg down, you punch through the snow, and you catch a rock the wrong way, and you have a broken ankle. I mean, anybody can do it, and you get into trouble quick and up high. But no, overall, it was a great day for us. We skinned up. We put the little skins on our skis, skinned up to the summit, and I I never have any kind of like interest in bagging. I haven't done all 48 4,000 footers. I've probably done like 10 of them, like 20 plus times each, but um, I never had too much a desire to finish all of them. But I'd never been up to the summit in wintertime. And I'd
All
been
right.
skiing, um, in Tarkermans but just never managed to go to the top for a number of different reasons. Usually a lot of times I want to get home before noon is what it is. Like I don't want to
Yeah,
spend
absolutely.
a whole day away from the family. So, but it was just so nice out. Ben and I started up. It was way clearer than it was supposed to be. It was, they said there were supposed to be 15, 30 mile an hour winds, and it was probably like 0 to 5 mile an hour winds. And
Wow.
we're just like, let's just go to the top, it's, and so we had a number of different objectives of what we might want to do that day. And we just ended up like, let's just hit the summit. And we couldn't ski back down because there was such little snow cover up there. It would have been like picking your way through rocks. So it was all ice. So we put crampons on a little bit above tree line and walked to the top, walked back down a bit, and then started skiing back down the cog. So yeah, fun morning.
Dude, so a lot of people probably don't understand what that looks like, but I will tell you from my experience in climbing mountains, not skiing mountains, that climbing it is a great enough feat by itself. To then ski up, to then ski down next to the cog railway, where when it's going up at certain points, you can stand up straight and you're at like, I forget what degree angle, but I can remember as a kid taking that rail car up and you're standing up straight, but you feel like your face is going to touch the floor. That's how steep, some areas of that section are. And I feel like when you start telling that story, it begins like every major tragic mountain climbing accident ever begins, right? It was beautiful out,
Right.
we didn't think we were going to get ourselves in trouble, and we went and pressed to the peak and blah blah blah. But before, so I was reading a little bit more about Mount Washington, and it's known for some of the worst weather in the world. And I know people probably don't think that because it's not like we're not in the Himalayas, we're not out in the west, but that weather up there, and there's a weather station on top of that peak, right? So they're obviously pretty well informed, um, but it can turn so quick. Like where I remember hiking Mount Eisenhower, and we get up to the top, it's beautiful and sunny, turn back around, and immediately a hailstorm is rolling in, and you're above tree cover. Like you said, you can get in trouble really really fast, and then all it takes is a small injury, and now you can't carry yourself out of there, and now you're in big trouble. So how do you guys mitigate that risk, because you know what you're up against, and you guys are very experienced, but sometimes that experience can cloud your vision, right? So how do you continually stay sharp, and how do you continually stay prepared so that if an emergency did happen, you can get your ass off that mountain?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's over educate uh, and undershoot your goal. Like I am, like I've told my wife before, is because she is not in that world or does any of that stuff, and she gets nervous when I do this. I'm like, I'm a quitter. I will if I don't feel good. 2 hours in, I'm headed back down. I quit way more things in the mountains than I way more than 50% of the time. And that's one of those things where Ben and I had a few different goals that day, what we're going to do. And, studied the weather for the day, studied the avalanche forecast for the day, like, just had a series of things that we're going to do. But it's very, very rare being up there so many times that those conditions are like that, and I knew we had a window. Like later that evening, the weather was supposed to turn. They're supposed to get some snow. Winds are supposed to pick up. But yeah, I think a lot of it is just really paying attention to the forecast, choosing the right time to go, and then making the right decisions. If someone's not feeling great, it's time to go down. It's um, I think it's easy to push too much when you're in a survival scenario like that. Like you never want to be too tired when you get to your spot, because then you got to go all the way back down, no matter where it is. Even if you're
Yeah.
only halfway up and you're already too tired, you could already be in trouble. So, um, yeah, I think education is key, and experience too. Different snow conditions, what tools you use, like winter hiking. Before I did skiing, or before I ski up and down, I have snowshoes with me at all times, because you can get pretty bad. It can look totally rocky, and then you have pretty bad drifts. Um, and that can be miserable, even if you're in a sheltered area and you're hiking and you've got to break 3 feet of snow with your snowshoes. I mean, that's a lot more taxing than hiking in the summertime. And then if it's totally packed in, it could be easier than hiking in the summertime, in the winter. So, yeah, it's education, and always be ready to bail.
Yeah, that's great advice because, so I'm coming off of reading this book called Deep Survival. It was
Oh yeah.
recommended to me to read. Have you read it?
No, I've heard of it though.
Oh man, it's totally your speed, and a lot of things that you're saying is so. This guy studied all of these accidents over many years, from plane crashes to mountaineering accidents to scuba diving accidents, and all these different things. And he tries to make a determination of what makes a survivor. Um, and number one is positive mental attitude. So he realized that all of these people that survived these horrific things had a positive mental attitude. But people that have avoided these things too, and they went with their gut, right? He talks about that gut feeling being very important. And that's what you're expressing by saying, yeah, man, I've quit more than a few things, because there was a story about some guys that were climbing, whatever, on ropes, right? Climbing the face of a mountain. And, they had showed up late. The weather wasn't what they thought it might be. So they figured they had a short window to get up there, get down. Long story short, they get caught in terrible weather. They're not prepared. Hypothermia is coming in. They had a problem with the rigging. One guy falls off the mountain, and all of them, at the beginning had that opportunity to say, dude, let's just not do it today. We just, not everything's going our way. So when you mentioned to me that you paid attention, you've backed off before, you got to read the book, man.
Yeah.
I got to get you a copy of it, because I read it in 3 days, and
Nice.
I learned a ton, of
Yeah.
just, and there were some things that I do, that I believe, according to the book, would set me up to, be well positioned in certain things. And then there's other things that I learned in the book where I would say, well, geez, my ego would have pushed me into that accident. Like I would have been the idiot saying, you know what, no, I'm tough. We're going, because at the end of the day, when you mentioned that, like, you're up there skiing and it's a survival, it is, you're in a survival zone. Like you're not meant to be up there. The human body cannot stay up there for that long and take what Mother Nature has to give out. So, it's like you always have to temper your ego, and you always have to respect the beast that's really, eventually will win out over you no matter what, right? But amazing book, really, really amazing. And it would really resonate with you, especially with all your experience. There's one where they talked about guys self-arresting with their ice axes, right? But they had a 30-foot slack line, and they, none of them had ever, fallen that far and tried to self-arrest the other. So, they thought they had the system in place, but they didn't respect the force on the system. And that was kind of the whole discussion, where someone falls 30 feet and then it becomes no longer slack.
Yeah.
That line is going to drag everybody off the mountain. And that's actually what happened. So yeah, certainly a book up your alley. I'll get your address before, once we get off here, and I'll send you the book. You got to read it. But I love what you're doing. I think that you're on a special mission, and really excited to just kind of see what you're up to next. And that race that we ran, you brought up that mile sprint.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. I know, like, everybody's like, yeah, like, it's a mile sprint, like, big fucking deal. I'm like, but for me, that was like kind of the start of really like running and going to like real actual races because I was always too scared to do that. And, I made a joke about it on the last one with Ben. It was like, dude, I showed up like just looking like a complete Jerry. You know what I mean? Like it's like when you see the guy skiing down the mountain with a starter jacket on, like that was me standing at the starting line of this 1 mile sprint. Like,
Yeah.
but I brought my hammer with me and I get the fucking job done,
Yeah.
but again, that was the fastest I've ever run in my life. And, when I showed up with you guys and you both there, like looking pretty limber and pretty excited to be there. And I'm like, my stomach's bugging me because I'm like, scared shitless of this thing. And you guys are like, yeah, we're going to warm up. And, I'm like, all right, cool. Yeah. Like, let's do a little stretching. And I like, start stretching and Ben's like, oh, we're going to go run a couple miles. And it's like, fuck is wrong with these guys? Like, we're here to do a 1 mile sprint. I'm going to use all my energy. They want to go for a fucking 2 mile jog. And that's when I knew kind of like, wow, there's different levels, there's different worlds, and I'm just starting to scratch the surface here. And honestly, probably one of the best days of my life. That and then the half marathon in Newburyport were two really special moments. And I just want people to understand that some of your best moments in life, and this will probably resonate with you, it'll resonate with Ben, it'll resonate with anybody that's ever done anything physically demanding. Some of the best moments are times you've proven yourself right. You've gone out and you've done these hard physical efforts. And, I think every time you come back and you analyze what you did, there's a level of confidence that keeps coming. And I believe it will kind of cascade through the rest of your life. And I shouldn't say I believe that it will. I know that it will because it has for me. And I'm sure that, I'd like you to kind of elaborate on that. Like, do you feel that there's any connection between feats of physical, struggle and how that feeds the rest of your life and makes you more equipped to handle things at work, hard things in your personal life? I mean, do you think that equips you for that? Because I feel like it does.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, I think my perspective with like doing endurance things is like I'm seeking out the pain. Like I'm running
Yes.
towards some pain because if I don't, it's going to come after me. And that's kind of the way I look at it. Like in one way that means, maybe as I get older, I'm not going to suffer as much with chronic disease or something like that. But also if you're used to the struggle in many different facets of your life, you can deal with other things too, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I always like, we got some hard decisions to make at work. We got some hard conversation to have. We got some hard meetings. And it's like, whatever, this is much easier than having to go out and run 5 miles.
Right.
It's like, it's almost like, oh yeah, this sucks, but like, I'm just catching a quick rest before I got to go, I got to go kick the shit out of myself again. Right. Like, so I always look at it that way. And again, I honestly believe like getting out of bed and getting those shoes on or getting into the gym or going out and riding the bike, like some days you don't want to do it. And even though like I've told you, the bike has saved my life and it's a very happy place for me,
Yep.
there's some days where I'm like, I don't want anything to do with it. And once you get on it, and then, I always say like, and I've mentioned this to Ben before, it's like, I don't evaluate on a run. I don't evaluate how I feel until about 2 miles in. I just don't even evaluate. Like,
Yep. Yep.
that first half mile, you're like, I have to turn around. Like, I feel like I'm going to die right now. Just things aren't going right. Then
Yep.
so I have this rule where at 2 miles, I'll evaluate. But I'm not evaluating. I'm not even giving a thought to an evaluation on how I feel, what's painful, what doesn't feel good, how my stomach feels, how my head feels. Like, I'm just not paying any attention.
Yep.
And that served me really well because almost every single time, come up to a mile and a half, you come up to, a mile 3/4, and you're like, oh, dude, I feel great. Like, okay, so now we're looking at how many more miles and how much time do I have to be out here to, to kind of dump it all out, right? So
Yep. Yep.
that's something for me that's been super helpful. Just not really evaluating and not really thinking too deeply into it until much later, because I'm sure there's been plenty of times that you've wanted to quit a couple miles in, or you know uh,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
couple
And that's,
runs in or whatever.
it is a tough thing too, to also gauge like when is this productive or not productive? Am I too tired? Do I need to stop? Or should I keep going? That is a hard decision to make, but I do like that. There's a husband wife coach that I really respect a lot that they say, give me 20 minutes, just go for 20 minutes. If you're still feeling that way after 20 minutes, maybe you're overtired. You need to take a rest day. If not, then, you just started your warm up and you're good to go. But yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Like you starting nice and easy and feeling how you go into it. I often will do, when I look at a week, when I do my own training plans, I'll put like 2 hard workouts in a week usually. And if it's the plan that day to do the hard workout and I start going and I know I'm not feeling it, I also know that if I push through it, it might be unproductive, like I might put myself into a hole a little bit more. So there's the flexibility of putting that another day during the week, because most of the rest of the week is easy. And there's lots of thoughts around, why do we think of it as 7-day week? Maybe it should be 10 days to give yourself even more flexibility
Yeah,
of
yeah.
throwing those things in. But yeah, I know those lines are hard to gauge. That's part of
Well,
the process too.
well, and exactly, and we talk about levels because me like 4 or 5 years ago might not have known exactly what it's like to push. So when I get that half mile, 2 mile, 1 mile in, and I'm like, oh man, I got to shut it down. It's like, nah, dude, you need to go experience like what that feels like. So you're at a level 2. You need to get to a level 5 or 6 before you can start saying, oh, you know what? I'm afraid I'm gonna, this isn't gonna be beneficial for me, right? I feel like there's like that, where you are right now, Dennis. It's like you have been able to push through all these different things, these 20 mile, 26 mile runs, whatever. So you've earned that right to say, okay, I know what pushing is. And I know when I'm a little bit out of line from that, when now I'm just being stupid. But when you get started, everybody needs to feel like that discomfort for the entire effort, and then they need to continue to push a little bit more and a little bit more. And I believe there's a place or a certain level that you hit where you've proven that you can push. You've proven that the mind can run the body, right? Where you're not going to take any input from the body. The mind is going to do its thing and it's going to force the body to follow. Now, once you get really good at that and you can do that over and over again on demand, then you can start to say, okay, listen, I can still do this. The mind's not giving up, right? I'm not like letting the mind say that we have to like stop. The body's telling me that it needs to stop. But you learn that connection over time by putting the miles on it and pushing through all those discomforts and through those different activities. So like when I talk about like, I'm always afraid to say anything to anybody about like, hey, pay attention to your body, because I don't know what level they're at, where it's like, you know, when I was first starting out, Ben never told me to pay attention to my body. He would just say, I would say something stupid like, hey, you think I can do this? And he'd be like, yeah, sure. And then I'd go fucking
Yeah.
do it, and then I fucking go do it. And then like, but I learned through that process of like how it felt to push. But now where I am now, if somebody was coaching me, they wouldn't be like, all right, Mike's mind, is giving up on him. He's letting his mind's letting him be soft. It's the exact opposite. It's like, hey, his mind needs to calm the fuck down, and he needs to pay attention to his body. And that's like kind of where we're at right now. I'm not quite there yet. Ben's been working with me on that to try to get better there, where it's like, okay, Mike, the mind is like, you're good. Like you've got this thing that's going to drive you through a broken leg, a fucking, whatever, cut your arm off, and you're still going to try to figure out how to run your thing. But I need to get better at now being in communication with my body, because I have done stupid things that I think, like you mentioned earlier, puts you in a hole. But for everybody listening, it's like, I just want to be clear on like, listen, if you're running down the road 100 yards and you're tired, oh, fucking stop. Just keep fucking running, because you haven't gotten to that point yet, but you will one day, and you'll understand exactly kind of what we're talking about with that balance. Is that a fair statement?
Yes and no. I'd push back a little bit and say, uh, there's a great TED talk that everyone should listen to. A coach called Steven Seiler. He's an American from Texas. He ended up moving to Norway and became a sports scientist there. And well, he was already, I think, a PhD by the time he moved over there. Anyway, he had grown up running cross country and was like, I think this group that I was talking about before, over 50-year-olds, you push it, like everything should be hard. You should be drilling every practice all the time. And he got to Norway and he was like watching this professional cross country skier in front of him running in the summertime, and she walked every hill. And he was like, "What the hell? What's going on here? Why is she walking?" And he became this big advocate of they call polarized training. So 80 or 90% of your time is spent at a very low heart rate, and then when you're doing a hard workout, it's got to be hard. And with little kids I coach and any adults that are asking me, I tell them to start really slow. Like a heart rate monitor gives you a lot of input. And so, if it's a walk run where you need to start with, you need to build some resiliency, I think, to even get to the point where you can push longer. But yeah, I mean, sometimes even a 10-minute walk could be uncomfortable, but there is that fine line. Like, are you really taking it too easy? You just have to be honest with yourself. And that's why I think training plans are really good. You've got this thing to sort of commit to as long as it's appropriately written for you. A lot of people can't, they want to run a 5K. The first month might be all walking, or brisk walking. And you're doing like little intervals of like 30-second pick up the pace walking kind of thing. And you slowly work up to that. So, yeah, but then you get to a point too. I found, a lot of endurance athletes in their 50s, they have such a strong base behind them and such relative little time to train sometimes, where they might do all of their training in zone 2, which is not particularly beneficial if they wanted to go really, really fast.
Right.
And it's not particularly beneficial for recovery, but they've pushed their aerobic capacity up to as high as it can go. And other people are not quite at that point. Other people couldn't be doing that as much as they can do. And they're in this world where maybe they're busy at work and they can't exercise for a week. But then every time they do, they can do 2 hours pretty hard each time, and that's a totally different spot than someone just starting out. But I like to, sometimes it's intimidating for people just starting to, you don't want them to think that everything's going to be painful. It's that it's going to feel really good at one point. It's going to feel so good that you don't want to miss a day, but yeah, when you're training for something, you got easy days and you got hard days, and you got to make each one of them count.
Yeah, I mean, dude, amen to that. That is a beautiful thing, right? I always like laugh about the day before, the week before my half marathon. Ben gives me the running plan, and it was like 7 miles, 4 miles, 3 miles, 3 miles, 2 miles, and then like take a short jog in the morning before the half marathon, whatever, something crazy, right? I remember
Yeah,
telling everybody about it because everybody's like, "Oh, make sure you rest that week," and I'm like, "No, exactly the opposite." But like, I really, it's like respect the process, follow the plan. So I said, you know what? This individual that's telling me to do this has a lot more experience than me. I'm going to listen. I'm going to put myself in their hands. I'm going to trust them, and sure as shit, dude, and put up, what, sub 2 hour, 1 hour, 59 minutes and some change. I
great.
was pretty proud of that effort. And,
Yeah,
but that all started when, we did that 1 mile sprint. I got the taste for it. And, I just want everybody to get a taste for it. That's part of like doing this thing. It's like, hey man, like exercise can help you. It can help you throughout your entire life. And whatever that exercise looks like, it doesn't have to be running. It doesn't have to be lifting. It could be riding your bike. It could be swimming, rowing, whatever it is. Like, just go move the body because that's what we were designed to do. And you've taken that to a whole nother level,
that's it. It's the best
Yeah,
medicine. Someone said that, if you could bottle up exercise, it would be the most successful medicine in the history of mankind.
it
And
is.
I really
Movement is
believe that.
medicine.
It really
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Could
I
I
mean,
could
look
I
at,
leave
yeah.
you could I leave you with a few books to read? I know
Yes, I would love
I
to.
gave you I gave you the TEDx talk of Dr. Steven Seiler, which is fantastic. I think I forget the name of it, but if you look up TED Talk, Steven Seiler, Seiler, you'll find it, and he is a great little storyteller with that talk. But the psychology of like endurance. Have you read Alex Hutchinson's
Endure.
Endure?
No, I have not.
Okay. So that's a fantastic one. It kind of gets into the psychology of endurance, like the limits of human potential and pushing their bodies. So you'd like that one. Similar is Steve Magnus. He's a fantastic running coach. He's one of the best follows on social media, I think, for someone looking for a running coach or running inspiration. And he's written a number of different books. I don't want to say the best, but I like the one. My favorite of his is Do Hard Things, it's called. Um, and so a lot of it's into the psychology of being able to do hard things or how to do hard things. And that's a really good one. And then one more is a friend of mine, Bill Donahue. He's an author. He's a very good, one of New England's best masters cross country ski racers, and he just wrote. He's been a long form journal article writer. Magazine and newspaper writer for a long time, but he specialized in like long form articles and magazines. But he wrote his first book last year called Unbound. I think it's like unforgettable true stories of endurance athletes. And to me, that's the thing about keeping people motivated. I tell anyone that's getting into it, like, one thing that keeps me into it is I love watching these sports,
Yep.
like knowing some of the athletes, following their story, learning about them, paying attention to the sports. Like, that stuff keeps you motivated. When you read some of these stories, like that can keep you motivated more than anything.
I'm excited to read those books. You obviously know me well because books are a huge part of my life now. They've been a big part of my life for the last 5 years. I attribute a lot of my breakthroughs and a lot of my whatever newfound successes to reading. So yeah, thank you for sharing those, and I will certainly buy them and get right on them. And I'm going to send you Deep
Nice.
Survival,
Yeah.
which I think, dude, you're going to rip through in a few days. Super excellent book, but more importantly, to close this thing out, if there's somebody out there, right, and then I need your advice to share with everybody. If there's somebody out there that's having a hard time getting started, what is a no bullshit advice that you can give them, that can get them out there moving? What would that be?
It's hard. I'm so measured with things. I tell them what I would go back to with my dad. You only have so much time on this planet. If there's something you want to do, you gotta start doing it now. And everything takes preparation and planning. And if you don't do it right, then you're going to quit early. And if you do it right, it leads you down a long road that's only going to be beneficial. So yeah, take advantage of it right now. We don't have much time on this planet, and you can only do so much. So get after it.
Listen, that I will take that home with me. That is something that will resonate with me for a long time. So thank you, Dennis. For everybody out there listening, this was a special one, very special person here, and you definitely need to take away some advice. And thank you for being vulnerable. Really appreciate that, Dennis. Let's patch this thing up, and thanks for coming out, man.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Mike.
All
It's
right,
been a
brother.
pleasure.
We'll see you. Yeah, we'll see you soon.
All right. Cheers.